Jester Boris here with I Want to Be a GM, and this is D&D Through the Ages Part 3, The Fighter. And you're joins us here now for 3rd edition and 4th edition. And we're going to cover both of those editions as we check out what changed or what got updated with The Fighter. So 3rd edition is the first edition that was released by Wizards of the Coast after their acquisition from TSR. And 3rd edition was the first edition that they killed Thaco. So no longer are we dealing with Thaco. All of the numbers move in the same direction. From a mechanic standpoint, it was a nice break. So I'm going to get into some of the basics real quick with Fighter here. We are still dealing with a D10 hit die. That hasn't changed since the last edition. But the mechanics of the game are quite different at its core. So we have skills that have changed: search, spot, listen, sneak. And you had skill points to assign to those that were different based on your class that you selected and some of your attributes. And then feats and talents were now a feature of the system, similar to what we discussed when it came to weapon specializations and non-weapon specializations, though most of it tended to focus on the combat aspects of the game. So Fighter started stronger in terms of the feats that they got at first level. So read it right here out of the book. There it is.
Those of you watching, we only have a couple of books, but we do have all of 3rd and 4th edition on computer PDF.
Yeah, we bought them all digitally at that era when things were being released digitally. So, weapon and armor proficiency. The fighter is proficient with all simple and martial weapons, and with all armor. Armor was divided into categories here for light, medium, and heavy. They are also proficient with all shields, including tower shields, as tower shields were broken out and required their own specialization or own feat to be able to use effectively. If you weren't proficient with a weapon, you took a -5 to your attack roll, and if you weren't proficient with an armor, you suffered a lot of skill check penalties to try to get around or work within that armor because you weren't used to wearing heavy armor or those sorts of things.
That took away from your hit possibilities, sometimes your damage, your movement.
And it was one of the ways that the game sort of tried to enforce the separation of classes so that you didn't have, heavy armor rogues still going out there and rolling high stealth checks.
Plate mail.
Right. So you see a little bit of that as we discuss some of the mechanics. But ultimately, just like we saw with the fighter before, all armor, all weapons, all magical weapons, and access to some magic still. So utility magic, healing potions, and those sorts of things are still available to the fighter as they have been in some of the previous editions. So,
this introduced, first off, they dropped the name Advanced, so it was just D&D now.
Yeah, we're back to just D&D.
Just D&D. It was D&D 3.0. They just dropped the Advanced. Also, they introduced the D20 system.
Yeah, this was a big change of Wizards of the Coast, and it was so the mechanics of this were made consistent, and we started to see this crop up with other game systems as well. So this, when Wizards released D&D, that is the core of the D20 system, and you'll see like a modern, a pirates, and some other sort of re-themes on top of it. But it was kind of cool because it made it easy to transfer characters as well.
Yeah, we could cross-platform with other games easier now, and we didn't have to change stuff. Empire of the Petal Throne had come out at one point during the basic system. It was a completely different world, but again, it had its own combat system. So now you're having to change it for the Thaco, having to change it for the D20. Once D20 came out, everybody adopted that, and now you could cross from one to another and be able to work with any system through D&D, or vice versa.
Yeah. Now,
and like you were talking about fighters and how they had weapons and a melee and a ranged weapon.
Excuse me.
In 3rd edition, the picture of the fighter actually has a sword in one hand and a bow in the other.
Yeah.
So
they were trying to put out that you still have that versatility. So Troy, 3rd edition wasn't something that you ended up playing a lot of, but you were still actively playing all the time. First and second when 3rd came out. So let's talk a little bit about that transition. Was it well received? Did you had a lot of people jump on board? What were your thoughts on it when it first released?
Well, what I saw when it first came out,
Yeah.
a couple of us bought a couple of the books to see what it was all about.
Yeah.
And there's so many core mechanical changes that we really couldn't see justification for, and a lot of us just didn't like them, and we became real resistant to it because it was just change.
Right.
And
particularly at that point, as you guys have seen, we've had tons of content in the older system.
I have 18 milk crates full of material.
Right.
Most of it first and second edition. And I was not about to turn around and spend that much money again on a whole other edition of stuff. But what I saw them doing as I watched the books coming out for the core stuff, a lot of the stuff that I love so much about second edition, such as the world settings or the fighter handbook, the priest handbook, the dwarf handbook, none of that material was coming out.
Right.
So it's just the core of the game, the DMG, player's handbook, monster manuals, all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of us,
they reintroduced the monster manual.
Instead of the monster compendium, we got a standard monster manual.
Yeah.
So no more 3-ring binder. But back to the core too, we had player's handbook, monster manual, and DMG.
But if they would have started coming out with some of the other supplemental stuff, we probably would have got into it a little more. But there were a couple players that had 3E characters, and with the game I was running at the time that I ran for years, my Planescape game, I loved it when people came to play with characters from other game systems or worlds, because it added to the flavor of what Planescape is. It's 54 known planes of existence, and this is only one of them. So you're going to run into weirdos every time you turn around. Well, it really added to the flavor. When this guy showed up from a completely different version of D&D, he looked familiar, but he had skills and talents and weapons and armor that were completely foreign to you.
Right, the way they understood
the way he did combat, the way he did spells, the way he did everything was completely different. It added to the flavor of that game. And I'll never forget the night we had a guy who played a Dark Sun character show up.
Oh, yeah.
He just completely, you want to talk about destroy a game? He had everybody fit to be tied. He played that character because Dark Sun, there was little to no steel for a variety of reasons. But it's a Bronze Age world in technology and especially with weapons. So you have a bronze dagger. And they wound up in Planescape traveling and seeing the Modron March and some of the Modron battles in the Blood War. Well, Modrons being creatures made out of steel, they're animatons, they're robots basically.
And you guys have seen their introduction, they're being brought forward into 5th edition, so you're probably familiar with Modron.
So this guy from Dark Sun had a conniption fit because everybody wanted to leave. These Modrons there, he's like, it's a pile of steel, let's get it. And then a guy who's from another world setting, who's from the world Dragonlance, a Tinker Gnome, he's playing Tinker Gnome. He found one that was just injured, and he started working on it and was able to repair it. Well, the Modrons quickly grabbed him up as a tremendous, great healer and wanted to drag him back to the city so he could heal all the other Modrons. And so very quickly, the party was pulling their hair out for one reason or another. They had to go rescue the Tinker Gnome, who was now being hauled off by Modrons as a healer, and they had another guy who was trying to steal Modrons' bodies, and that wasn't being looked upon very well by other Modrons in the city who were trying to bring back their dead to bury them.
The healers are like, so we got a healer on this side and a desecrator on the other. I don't know what to think about these guys.
So when there's a change from character type to character type, I'm not the one that says, I hate it, I don't like it. I usually have a reason, and it's because of the game that I like to play.
Right.
And so when we get into these different versions of games, I look at it from the game that I like. And the one thing that I like about D&D is you take the stuff you like, and you don't use the stuff you don't.
Right.
You change it. It's like Gary Gygax said, if the rules don't matter.
Yeah. So, if they ever figure out you don't need the rules to play, we're all out of business.
So, what I encourage DMs out there who are watching this, find the game you like to play and then blow it out of the water. I mean, just everything about it. Just engulf it completely, make it yours, and then add to it. So you have this fighter. He has, and the
that doesn't mean allow anything and everything.
No.
Right. Because when you adopt something or you allow something, you have to deal with it forever.
Yeah, as soon as you let in, like we have a D&D world, as soon as you let in one musket, well, by God, here comes a Spanish fleet.
Oh yeah,
you
no
know.
one expects the Spanish Inquisition.
No.
Ah!
So you have to be very mindful of the things you do allow, and try to figure out what's going to happen in the future. If I give this guy a musket today, where's that going?
Right.
So in my D&D worlds, I don't allow gunpowder.
Yeah.
As a alchemist can make you gunpowder, but there are no mechanical contrivance.
Right. Cannon and
there's no
explosives.
cannon, there's no
and,
flint.
Yeah.
Right. That technology doesn't exist yet. But there is gunpowder. So, but this guy, I love this guy.
Yeah.
He's
So he's
got a sword, he's got a bow, he's got decent armor, and he's got a look on his face that says, "I'm about to kick somebody's ass."
Yeah.
Yeah. So scale mail was one of the pieces of starting equipment that you could get as a fighter,
Yep.
and it was, I think, it was like the heaviest medium armor you
So,
could get without
they're-
going to plate mail.
When they talk about the light, medium, heavy armor,
Yeah.
that's also something that I personally understand, because for years I fought in an organization called Society for Creative Anachronism.
Yeah.
And I have worn armor and I have fought my friends. And it's a tremendous amount of fun. I encourage everybody out there to find out their local organization.
Look up sca.org.
Yep.
And look up your particular state, and you'll find out all the information you need.
It is not a LARP group.
No.
It is a historical recreation. So you
Actually taking things from a medieval standpoint. So everything that you do, everything that you are, you earn your titles. You don't walk in and say you're a duke. You
No.
got to earn
Right.
that.
you earn
And
you're in that from day one.
Yeah,
But
you do things
You,
from
you live in the medieval time.
yeah, from
your-
a period
your-
standpoint.
Your clothing, your campsite, your food, everything. It is just a tremendous amount of fun. But you learn a lot about history. And so from my games, I have a lot of more historically accurate weapons and ways to fight.
Mhm.
Of course, magic didn't really exist, unfortunately. But so when it comes to using a sword and using a bow in our combat,
Right.
I tend to be a little nitpicky about the way things are or not allowed.
And that was one of
Yeah.
the things that was cool about the system was that, while it wasn't meant to be nitpicky, it did provide those avenues for some of the realism that people wanted to have introduced without going away from being a game. You know,
True,
sometimes you
true.
get punished for like, oh, you got stabbed in the leg, now you have tetanus and you can't walk. You're like, well,
Yeah.
we just started the adventure.
Well, one of the things also that we saw introduced back in the original D&D was they took your body and they divided it up in percentages.
Oh yeah, the
So like
hit
your
locations.
arm is 15%, your torso is 80%. And some of that tends to get too much in the detail of it, and it
Yeah.
takes away from being a game.
Mhm.
I try to keep it a game, and the combat, though, can get kind of spicy.
Something they did in third edition is they actually assigned damage to armor
Yes.
and to your weapons.
Yeah.
And so a hardness and what it took to break them and so on and so forth. Now, I did this back in the white box system that instead of just having 6 points,
Yeah.
we gave our armor points, and that way the first points were taken off your armor before it got to you.
Mhm.
But as we were fighting things, when we killed something, we were ripping their armor. And what's this good? And we would roll percent dice. Well, that's 80% good, you know. And you'd take some nasty, sweaty, old bloody orc piece. We'd put that on, you know, to where we'd be back to having something there, and this vamp brace here, and this helmet with the goose, this brain
you
still coming
wonder
out.
why they're making you roll for tetanus.
Yeah, you know, and we're going on to keep our character alive back when you had 4 and 6
Yeah.
hit points, and we would use the armor from anything and everything. And so
Mhm.
when we started seeing them assigning different numbers to the armor sword, we were excited. It's like, we've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we have a system. The other mechanic that changed in 3 is the fighters now had feats.
Oh yeah, with the
So
feats and talent
the
systems.
feats and bonus feats, and something the fighters got a feat every level. They got bonus feats.
Well, in the mechanics of the system,
yeah.
you'd get bonus feats based on your class. They had to
Mhm.
come off of a specific list for your class. So Rogue could get bonus feats for like specializations in stealth, where the fighter would get more things like weapon specialization, multi-attack proficiencies, and those sorts of
Two-handed
things.
weapons, yeah.
Yeah. And so those while you would get the bonus feats, they were meant to come off these lists, and that would further separate and flavor the classes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just like Fighter before you, you had a lot of options depending on the sort of feat trees that you went down.
Yeah.
So there was one of the mechanics that was introduced was attacks of opportunity. If you had bad guys running through the battlefield, not paying attention, and they enter a zone that you threatened, you got a free attack on them, and that was kind of cool. But with certain feats, now you can get multiple attacks of opportunity, and so that playstyle became about positioning and the number of weapons you had, and the number of guys you could get multiple attacks on. The other playstyle was cleaves.
Yes.
So like if I take this guy out, I get a free attack against his buddy.
It keeps going. So if I hit this guy, it may cleave through him and go to the next.
Well, so it was cleave, great cleave, whirlwind attack, and then there was an addition later for where you could step in between the cleaves. Mm-hmm. So if that guy was a square away, so you're like, hold on, let me take a step. Oh wait, I killed you too.
Yeah.
You see, both of us have actually done that. I've killed so many people, and it's hilarious. But it was nice to start to see these become features of the game system where you could build that character. And so, whether you were still doing ranged combat as a fighter, you were doing specialized. So we had, they started with simple and martial weapons. So that'd be like long swords or bastard swords. They also added exotic weapons, chain whips, and some of the chakram or kama, some of the martial arts weapons you'd see from different cultures. Yeah, multiple staff. Monk was another class that was brought back into the core for this game. So we got a lot of cool things we could borrow over there for unarmed combat, grappling. There was a lot of things,
Brawling came in, grappling, all that.
So, stuff that we had seen in these previous editions were brought forward into 3rd edition, which was cool because as a player with a character that was a fighter, you still could make the fighter that you wanted to make.
Now, brawling was awesome because, a bar fight would break out every now and then. My wife is a phenomenal cleric, but in her very first bar fight, there was a big brawl that came out, and somebody hit her with a full mug. I mean, it was tossed, it missed whoever it was going to. She got hit with it. She's like, "Oh, I don't think so." She comes out, and people are swinging and hitting and grappling, this, that, and the other, and she pulls a sword and stabs a guy, and kills him, and the whole place stopped. They just stopped, and they're like, "You killed Tony! She killed Tony! What? She stabbed him with a sword! It's a bloody ball fight! We don't pull swords in ball fights! What was she thinking?"
That's resurrected.
So no, she wasn't that good yet. She wasn't that good. The whole party got taken off to jail. They sold all our stuff and gave to the widow. We actually left that town naked and afraid. So, that was her first
either
experience.
that or going to jail for manslaughter.
Yeah,
Well, that seems like Murder 3. But anyway,
Technicalities.
Technicalities.
Like it was
That's usually
in the back.
He was technically stabbed.
that's usually something you expect out of the barbarian.
Shut up.
So one of the things that I'll just go down some of the feats that were available. Give you an idea of what you might expect. You could have as an option for your character here. They didn't put the list there. That's one of the things that kills me. This book is mostly laid out. It's like 80% what I expect, but some of the things here, they've got a dwarf fighter sort of example character. And so you start with scale mail, which is a +4 to your AC. 10 is your base, and so it would be +4 plus your dex modifier. You would get an armor check penalty of -4 to certain skills, or if you are not proficient with that armor. Their speed is 20 feet instead of 30 feet, so 4 squares instead of 6 because they're dwarves with little legs. You get the heavy wooden shield. It gives you a +2 AC, but it adds an additional armor check penalty. And you get the dwarven war axe with a 1d10. Crit damage on that war axe was ×3. So this is one of the things where we see d20s and critical hits really become sort of a feature of this class, or sorry, this
Gaming system. Yeah.
game system. I'm losing it. I apologize.
Okay.
But
Read something else.
so And then now one of the things that was rough was your skill selection was 2 plus your intelligence modifier,
Yeah.
and they had 20 some skills. And so if you had them, if you selected a skill, say for example you had athletics, which they actually broke into jump, climb, swim.
Yeah.
So maybe not jump as a dwarf, but but climb. You know, you got your full skill point value, and everything else was half your skill point value with a cap. And so it made skills a little more punishing,
Mhm.
but skills were sort of the realm of the rogue and the wizard.
Mhm.
The fighter was meant to go out and become a blender, which you could do very effectively.
Or if you were a cleric with blade barrier.
Yes, spells were always good.
Which-
So it was just one of those things where the game core mechanic was quite a lot different, and the way you built your character through those mechanics didn't really change the core of the game as far as a story standpoint. Forgotten Realms became Wizards of the Coast, chosen world setting, so a lot of this stuff was written from that perspective, which was kind of neat. You went and we got a little bit more magic out of it, but the different cultures and things that have been fleshed out also meant that you had that variety available to you as a player when it came to put your character together.
Prestige classes added more to multi-classing. Once you got to a certain level, you were able to mix and match levels of classes.
So
but at a certain level, you got to a prestige class and you made even more choices, which they've got in 5th. Like at 3rd level, you choose a path.
Yeah.
Well, here it's a little later in your progression that you get to select a prestige class, and now there's even more multi-classing options.
Right, multi-classing. So multi-classing, we talked about our dual classing in 1st and 2nd. Fighter magic was still an option here.
But you still had the confusion of experience points and penalties, and the rate of progression was an absolute mess.
It was a bit weirder here than some of the others, but what he was talking about, you may remember, so I could go and become a fighter, take my particular sets of feats, and then become a weapons master.
Mhm.
And so that was my class and not so much my title.
Yeah.
We see a lot less of your level titles here and less focus on keeps, followers, and henchmen, those sorts of things that we saw play heavily in the earlier editions, and more focus on sort of what your character was doing and the adventure you were running. It was very much sort of hero focused, which was a lot of fun. I mean, you became more central to the story, not that you ever weren't, but the mechanics reflected that in this
3rd
point.
edition came up with Unearthed Arcana again, which we were very open arms to because of what we'd already experienced before. So they came up with a new Unearthed Arcana. Was Alchemist introduced there?
I don't remember what all class, because that was one of the things that's so in this era of play.
Gestalt was introduced, the Gestalt character, which had the ability to combine the advantages of 2 classes, thus becoming even more powerful than just the addition of matching feats and so on. And then they presented 2 more fighter variants, the Thug, because everybody needs a thug in their game, who gained a lot more skills but could only wear light armor, and another variant trading in fighter bonus skills for sneak attacks. And that was more of a finesse fighter.
Well, that was one of the things that was interesting, is that strength is still the prime requisite, but through feats, you could change your 2 hit from your strength bonus to your dexterity bonus. And so a high dex character, now I have my dex bonus to avoid being hit, and my dex bonus to hit you.
And now your prestige classes were Cavalier, Frenzied Berserker, and Weapon Master.
Yeah, Paladin was a subclass in previous systems, as its own class moving forward.
Or just moving.
So
where'd the Paladin go? He's over here.
They kind of did move him around a lot.
Yeah.
But Ranger was another subclass that broke out into its own in this class. So, it was, they started to add a little bit of the more of the focus on tracking. Favorite enemies were a feature of Ranger. And so while it had a lot of the benefits of Fighter, it also had some focus that was pretty neat that we saw from some of the earlier editions with Ranger as well.
Now, Fighters didn't undergo a really major change in 3.5 when we left 3 behind.
Yeah, that was the rebalance that Wizards did about halfway
Yeah.
through the release.
They changed. They got addition of the greater weapon focus and greater weapon specialization feats, which both increase their attack power and the selected weapons.
Yeah.
That became available. The feat trees that they came up with in 3.5, I swear, didn't just have branches; it had roots.
Oh no, yeah, these they
The
started to
feat trees
become
were ridiculous.
yeah. So you'll start to see where
Yeah.
it's like we need these 4 to come to this, to then branch into that. Some of the options became a little overwhelming as they added different additions, and particularly as the D20 system allowed you to bring stuff in.
Yeah,
It could be a little
daunting.
well. Yeah, I mean, so there was a lot of repeat, and then there was a lot of new stuff.
Mhm.
You're like, well, this one gives me a +2, this one gives me a +3, but I can't use that one because it's pirates, and it was very
Or I've
odd.
got to get my exotic feat, which means I can't get a feat. This level, I've got to get that first, so I don't want to lose it.
But the
Player's
power,
Handbook 2 then came out for 3.5. That added even more feats because there wasn't enough.
not Player's Handbook also, but
Player's
Player's Handbook
2.
2, new player options, new class options, new feats and talents. One of the things that was great about this era for D&D, however, was the open game license.
Yeah.
And we started to see under the open game license a lot of things like Ravenloft got updated for 3rd edition and brought back to Dungeons and Dragons. So fairly popular 2nd edition, update for the new rule set, and here you go.
Yeah.
Open game license also allowed smaller companies to produce their own modules and content, spin-offs for things like we didn't see a lot of Cyberpunk in 3rd edition there, Mr. Producer, but we did see a subset game system for Starship Troopers.
Yeah.
So a lot of things that use the D20 system through the open game license that either were meant for Dungeons and Dragons or based on that game system to be able to branch out into other themes and genres. It was kind of fun.
Once 3.5 was out and people kind of got used to it, Pathfinder came out, Pathfinder 1.0.
Well, this was towards the end here, but yeah, Pathfinder was part of the
3.75. Yeah, it was. That's what we fans lovingly
that's what
referred to it.
yeah.
too.
As they moved into 4th, towards the end of D&D, and they were like, okay, hold on, we did what to the rules? All right, we need to reset or move some stuff. But Pathfinder was probably one of the best open game license games
Yeah,
that came.
because there was so many more books that came out because we didn't have enough books.
Right.
The broken aspect about Pathfinder was you could work a specialization with a weapon or with the powers on a weapon to where you could crit on a 12 through 20.
Oh, that was a feature of this. So,
And
Scimitar crits on a 19 to 20. So,
in Pathfinder, it's 18 to 20.
or maybe that's what it is. So, but it's so you start with a scimitar, and then you get Weapon Master, and so there's feats that double your crit range, triple your
Yeah.
crit range.
Then you get Keen, magical Keen on it,
And
and
then-
that brings
yeah.
it up another. And that's where you got the 12 to 20.
So you use Whirlwind Attack as a dwarf. You run into the middle of the goblins. Whirlwind Attack feat allows you to attack all adjacent targets. You are using dual weapon fighting with scimitars. He goes, and everything dies because you critically hit everything. Beat drums.
I'll just eat this.
Right, but that was one of the paths you could take as a fighter if you wanted to focus on critical hits, and it was the dice probability says 10 is your average. Well, in the bell curve, 12's pretty common too.
Yeah.
Which means you crit pretty much 80% of the time. It
Yeah.
was
in terms of raw damage, fighters basically were matched only by barbarians, even with specialization. with
and
the
that was
other
a
people.
rage focused barbarian.
Yeah. They got a boost in high armor class values since they could wear heavy armor and keep their dexterity bonus to their AC.
Yeah, and then
Against certain opponents, the paladin and ranger can match or even surpass the fighter class, but they couldn't keep with the wide variety of areas that the fighter had available for them. And
as a
they
fighter,
did,
you could
yeah.
had more dynamicism. You could
Yeah.
go this way or that way and be awesome.
And it all depended on the weapon you chose because that is what direction you took your feats in. Just as a note, in these systems, especially Pathfinder 1.0, but 3.5's on there. I think 4.5e might even be on there as well now. Lone Wolf is a company to look up. Lone Wolf's Hero Labs program.
Oh yeah.
I use it for Pathfinder. You can put your character in there, and it gives you everything about the character. You can add the weapon. It'll give you every different way that weapon can be used: single-handed, double-handed, as an offhand, as a main hand. It gives you all the different calculations of 2-hit damage and crit right there on the page for each one. There's so many aspects to it, and all you do is print it. You can save it as a PDF. You can print it out. It costs a little bit up front, but I think there's 5 licenses with it. So if you get 5 people to put $20 in a piece for the program, everybody's going to have it, and you're going to have all the books to the system. And now as a DM, you can gain real control over the characters and what they have and see where they're at. Print them out. It's really nice and neat. It's easy to read, and you don't have to do the calculations, do so much by hand.
That's all right. So, what I'm looking up here is 4th edition. But one of the things that I play a lot is Star Wars, and so they had a Star Wars D20.
Mm-hmm.
And then they further refined that D20 system into the Star Wars Sagas edition, and it addressed a lot of the issues with class balance and skill progression.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely preferred that as my primary system, even though it's themed for Star Wars, because feats and talents cross. You can D&D, you can go and do modern, you can do whatever you want with it. That's the system I prefer, because I like, as a player, having the ability to tailor my character to whatever concept that I like.
Sure. Do they have archetypes? Because that's something else that Pathfinder had.
That was a
Was the
Pathfinder specific thing to
archetypes.
Pathfinder.
Yeah.
As Pathfinder continued
I
to
wasn't
develop.
a huge fan, but a lot of people are. There are trade-offs. You'd sacrifice one thing to be able to have something else. It was just it took prestige class in a different direction, and they just called it archetypes. Like I say, I was never really a fan. I found that if you just select the right feats and the right weapons and items and stuff like that, you pretty much had everything you needed.
This is where I liked the focus of Star Wars Sagas edition.
Left
You went
it.
from Jedi
Yeah.
to Jedi Knight to Jedi Master
Yeah.
as different classes.
Railroaded. Yeah.
No, but you didn't have to. But they had those progressions were there. So I would usually go like fighter, ace, pilot, and then also pick up elite trooper. Those are 2 different prestige classes, but because I play a pilot,
so
there's a lot.
hobo, thief. Then what was the other one? I'm sorry. I
Vagabond.
forgot the other- Vagabond.
So, a little
Gypsy.
bit
Gypsy.
here about 4th edition. Gwydion played
And that's
a little
it
bit.
for 4th edition.
Oh,
We'll
okay.
get back with 5th here in just a minute.
Didn't stick around a lot. Wizards of the Coast, late in 3rd edition, tried to launch their miniatures game, and 4th edition was meant as a companion to that. So we get where they also try to bring up a more epic feel. Everybody got powers or exploits. Different terminology was used around certain things, but you got also healing surges, so you could heal yourself. It was meant to be a little bit faster pace and more heroic feel to the game. So
I think they tried to make it more like a video game. Our group, there was about 8 of us in a group. We tried to play it for a year, and it just didn't work for us. Assassin, Bard, and Druid were dropped. Don't ask me why. Everyone had an at-will attack or power that could be used every single turn. That was your at-will. And you generally had more than one at-will to choose from. You had a daily attack or power, depending on the type of character you were, and that was usable once a day. A utility power that came from whatever class you were. You had a utility power that came with it that you could use, again, once a day or until it was come back on. And an encounter attack. So each encounter you got to use this once, otherwise you were back to your at-will, or do you want to use your daily or your utility right now? And that was pretty much how it was played.
certain things here, I'll read this. So in third edition, we just talked about having a light, a medium, and a heavy armor proficiency.
Mhm.
Fourth edition breaks it down for cloth, leather, hide, chainmail, scale, and then light shield and heavy shield. So we see where they're definitely breaking equipment types down. This is where we got more of the sort of video game aspects. The feel of it was more what I would expect out of an RPG than what I would expect out of a tabletop. So hit points at first level is 15 plus your Constitution score, so there's no die roll. We saw the D10 for third edition. We see it again in fifth. But here we got a flat 15 plus your con. Healing surges per day is 9 plus your Constitution modifier, so quite a lot of healing as a fighter. And it lists your key abilities as Strength, Dex, Wisdom, and Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of depends on the path that you took, what powers you wanted to use. But strength has always been the sort of prime requisite for a good fighting class.
Now, a fighter was basically a defender
Yeah, they've got
in
some.
D&D 4. It was more of a defender than the guy that gets out there because he had higher hit points, good defensive capabilities, the ability to protect other party members from enemies. I mean, they were more of the defender. They were able to mark their opponent, and their enemies suffered penalties if they didn't focus on them and attack them.
Yeah, so those would be they've got build options as Great Weapon Fighter or Guardian Fighter. And that was sort of your paths. And then features were Combat Challenge, which would be a taunt of some kind to focus the enemy on you. Combat Superior, and Fighter Weapon Talent.
Yeah, and if they didn't concentrate on you, you got an opportunity to attack on them.
Yeah. So we'll see some of the combat mechanics from third fall into fourth. But fourth was quite a big departure. You know, second to third was a huge mechanic shift, and third to fourth was also a very large mechanic shift.
Yeah.
And so we're definitely, you know, when we look at 5, I see a lot more of 3. I like the mechanics of 5. And I see a little bit of that epic character come into 5th edition. I like that sort of big style that in the theme of things. But they've toned it back a little bit so that you're more into the tabletop realm, your classic D&D themes, and your characters show through in 5th over 4th, I feel.
Fighters gained a combat power known as exploit. They got exploits, and that mechanically resembles spells in the early editions of the game. The second wind ability for 4th edition D&D is now unique to the fighter class, and that was one reason to go for the fighter. You got second wind. They can take additional actions with the action surge, gain more stat boosts than any other class. So in 4th edition, honestly, the fighter, in my opinion, was the only way to go.
I did like Cleric in 4th edition. It had some interesting plays on some of the powers that could be done, but it definitely had a greater focus and healing, as we saw when we did our Cleric video. And that's definitely a departure when you used to see the Cleric, the fighter, and the Barbarian on the front lines when it came to fighting the big bads.
Multi-classing. 4th edition allowed characters to take a feat that grants access to specific facets of another class. Class-specific multi-class feats were also prerequisite for the power swap feat, each of which allowed a character to swap out the daily encounter utility power of the first class with the second class. So it wasn't true multi-classing. They were switching aspects through the power swap. They become eligible for Paragon multi-classing. Let's see. Which allowed them to gain additional powers from their second class in lieu of taking a Paragon path, because that's where they were supposed to go, just being straight fighter. Choose a
If you
Paragon
guys are
path.
out there still playing 4th edition, let us know. It's not something we run across a whole lot of. We do know that some of the DMs that we talk to, they play Savage Worlds now, Quinn and all them, did start in 4th edition. So it may have been your first edition, or first entry into Dungeons and Dragons. But 5th edition is definitely where we see a lot of people, and you know it feels like it's got more accessibility than 4th edition. 4th edition got a little muddy. If you'd like to know more about 4th edition, let us know, and we'll cover some of the fighter and other aspects a little bit more deeply. But
I do want to mention one 4th level aspect.
Yeah, so this is one thing we'll mention here. Last thing on the
Paladin.
fighter. Oh yes.
You got to mention the Paladin. They had 3 subclasses. The original Paladin as a defender, the Cavalier, and a defender, and the Blackguard is a striker. So you had original Paladin as a defender. The Cavalier was also a defender. Blackguard was a striker. They had 29 levels of at-will powers, a plethora of heroic tier feats, a few Paragon feats, 2 epic tier feats, 3 Paragon paths, and could select a multi-class Paladin feat. So Paladins were still alive and well, but the
way they broke them down and
broke it down
mechanically
was 3 paths.
quite interesting. So that is the fighter in 3rd edition and 4th edition. Definitely have a preference for 3rd and the crazy blender. That could be the dwarf.
No Pathfinder, but thanks.
Well, also Pathfinder. Pathfinder took the craziness and I think kept it, where some of the other things were like, we should tone that back a little bit. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get all this stuff put away. We're going to come back with 5th edition and talk about some of the fighter options that you guys are playing with out there on a day-to-day.
I just wanted to see the 4th edition crib sheet, so stop it on that.
Not much, but
yeah.
But
and I've got 3 pages on Healing Surge, but we're not going to go through that right now.
Like if you're interested in it, we will cover it, because there was a lot of interesting things that were done in it, but a lot of it ultimately got abandoned for 5th edition, and I think we see more of the core that came through 3rd.
4th edition turned into the board games you see now. All the D&D board games,
and those are fun.
Chardalon.
Oh no, yeah,
those are great. Wrath of a Chardalon and Legend of Dritz and so on like that. Get them, because those are phenomenal.
Go to the local game store.
They use 4th edition, and it works.
Oh,
it works as a board game beautifully.
And
it just didn't work as D&D.
Fun.
Yeah,
so
those are great. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm Jester Boris for I Want to Be a GM, and that was D&D Through the Ages, Part 3, The Fighter, in 4th and 3rd edition. With me on my right,
Troy, the Planescape guy.
Gritty and the Long-Winded.
And when we come back, we'll be seeing you with The Fighter in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons.